The varnish on the bottom shelf was still tacky when my phone lit up on the workbench. I almost didn't answer. I was arranging my brushes, rounds and flats and filberts lined up in old mason jars, smallest to largest, the way my ceramics teacher taught me 40 years ago. The way I used to keep them before I stopped painting. Before the years that swallowed everything I used to be. I wiped my hands on a rag and picked up without thinking. "Mom." My daughter's voice carried the tone I recognized immediately. Not the soft one, the logistical one. "Drew's whole family is in from Ohio this weekend. All of them, cousins, aunts, his grandmother, everyone. Probably 35 people. We need space for Saturday. Your new room is the biggest thing you've got. Can you clear it out? We'll bring folding tables." I stood very still. "Mom, you there?" "I heard you," I said. "Great. We'll be there by 10. Don't worry about food. We'll bring stuff." A pause that wasn't really a pause. "Actually, could you make that cornbread? People loved it last time." The line clicked. I set the phone face down on the workbench. I looked at the room around me. The shelves I'd built with the help of a YouTube tutorial and 2 trips to the hardware store. The second-hand drafting table I'd driven 40 minutes to pick up last spring. The window I'd reframed myself so the northern light would fall. The way light is supposed to fall in a painting studio. The canvases stacked against the far wall, still blank, still waiting. The glass palette I'd bought at a craft fair in Vermont the summer my husband was still alive. The one I'd kept wrapped in a pillowcase through 2 moves because I couldn't bear to use it until I had a real space. I'd been planning this room for 11 years. Not the room itself. A room is just walls. But what the room meant, the version of myself I'd set aside when I married at 26, then again when the children came. Then again when my husband passed and my daughter said, gently, "Mom, you shouldn't be alone in that house." And I believed her, the way I always believed her, because believing her was easier than fighting. That was 4 years ago. 4 years in their guest room. 4 years of waking early to start coffee before anyone else stirred. Not because anyone asked, but because I understood, somehow, that this was the price of being welcome. 4 years of my son-in-law's family treating me like pleasant furniture, comfortable enough to have around, invisible enough to talk over. 4 years of cornbread. 4 years of school pickups, grocery runs, folded laundry left on beds, and not once, a thank you that felt like it cost something to say. When I finally moved back to my own house, my son-in-law said it like a verdict. "Well, if that's what you need." If that's what I needed. As though wanting to live in my own home at 63 was a personality flaw requiring explanation. I renovated slowly, on my retirement income and the small inheritance my mother had left me. The kitchen first, then the bathroom, then the bedrooms. The studio was last. I'd converted the old den, knocked out a closet wall for space, sanded the floors on my knees over 2 full weekends, rehung the window. I bought the shelving lumber in October and stained it walnut myself. The room was finished on a Thursday evening. By Friday afternoon, my brushes were in their jars, and my palette knife was in its drawer, and the glass palette, still wrapped in that pillowcase, was finally unwrapped and resting on the drafting table in the light I'd spent a year planning for. Saturday morning, my daughter called. I didn't pace, I didn't cry. I stood in the center of that room and I looked at all of it, and I thought right, not defeat, strategy. I went to the kitchen and found a yellow legal pad in the second drawer, and I drew a line down the middle of the first page. Left column, what they would need: folding tables, extension cords, trash bags, overflow seating. Right column I underlined twice. Photographs, inventory list, placement values, event space rates, county code, residential use clause. I underlined replacement values a second time. Then I went back to the studio and photographed everything. Every shelf, every brush, every canvas. I opened the filing cabinet and pulled the receipts for the drafting table, the specialty paper I'd ordered from a supplier in Portland, the lighting fixture above the window. I had my phone camera and 2 quiet hours, and by the time I sat down to eat dinner, I had everything documented. I called my neighbor Sue that evening, a retired paralegal who played bridge with me on Thursdays. I didn't call her for drama, I called her for accuracy. Just make sure you have it printed and signed before anyone uses the space, she said. That's your protection. I said I would. Commercial event space in my county ran $75 to $120 an hour. Community centers $45. I wrote down all three figures and the county ordinance that applied to residential properties hosting gatherings over 20 people. Then I typed up a rental agreement at the kitchen table, studio space, private residence, non-commercial rate, $60 per hour, and I printed 2 copies on the printer I kept in the hall closet. I placed 1 copy in the filing cabinet and folded the other into an envelope and set it on the kitchen counter by the coffee pot, where someone would eventually see it. No one looked at it that night because they weren't there yet. Saturday was still coming. I spent Friday evening moving the things I couldn't replace. The glass palette went to the shelf in my bedroom closet, wrapped back in the pillowcase. The specialty paper, 140 Elb cold press, ordered in sheets from Portland, went into the closet behind my winter coats. The small paintings I'd already finished, 3 of them, went behind my bedroom door, flat against the wall. What could not be replicated went somewhere safe. What remained in the studio was significant but survivable. They arrived Saturday morning in 3 cars and a minivan. My daughter came through the door the way she always does, brisk, carrying a foil pan of something, already in motion, already past the greeting. My son-in-law followed. Then his aunt, then cousins I'd never met, then more people. Voices filling the hallway, voices bouncing off walls that had been quiet for 4 months. Someone had a Bluetooth speaker clipped to a belt loop. It was already playing. "Studio's this way," my daughter called, and she led them down the hall without looking at me. I stood at the kitchen counter and watched through the doorway as they filed in. One cousin moved my brush jars without asking, not roughly, just the way you move something that doesn't belong to anyone particular. The folding tables went up fast. A teenager sat on the edge of the drafting table because it was there and she was tired. My son-in-law's grandmother took the only stool and asked if there was somewhere she could plug in a heating pad. "Of course," I said, and I found her an extension cord. By noon, the studio smelled like lunch. Someone had set a foil tray directly on the drafting table surface, the work surface I'd spent 4 hours sanding, and left it sitting there on bare wood. I moved it without a word and slid a folded dish towel underneath. No one noticed. A child tracked something red and sticky across the refinished floor. One of the cousins had taken a wide flat brush from the windowsill jar and was using it to spread cream cheese on a bagel. Not maliciously, just without seeing it. I went to the kitchen and opened the legal pad. I did not make cornbread. No one asked again. By late afternoon, my son-in-law's uncle had found the closet where I kept the overflow supplies, extra canvas boards, a bottle of gesso, and had stacked several items on the floor to make room for a beer cooler. Not a catastrophe in isolation, a piece of a picture. I took photographs of everything, not obviously, not theatrically, just steadily as the afternoon went on, the way you document something you intend to use. Sunday morning, I found 2 of my round brushes in the bathroom sink, stiff and discolored at the tips, not paint, hair dye. I set them on the counter and photographed them and stood there for a moment looking at them. Then I went outside and stood on the back porch and looked at the roses coming up along the fence. The orange ones were doing something beautiful. After breakfast, which I did not prepare, though several people had found things in my refrigerator they liked, I set the rental agreement on the kitchen table with a pen placed alongside it. My daughter looked at it and smiled the way she smiles when she's decided something is a joke. "What is this?" "The space agreement," I said, $60 an hour based on local community center rates. Saturday runs to $540. I've left Sunday open for now. She laughed, short and bright. "Mom, we're family." "I know," I said, "which is why I didn't charge for the brushes." My son-in-law looked up from his phone. He looked at my daughter. She looked at me. Neither of them picked up the pen. I went back to my coffee. By Sunday evening, the last car had pulled out of the driveway. I went through the studio alone, slowly, the way you walk through a room after something has happened in it. The drafting table had a ring mark where a cups had sat without a coaster. The floor had 2 areas of stickiness. The mason jars had been rearranged, brushes mixed together, rounds with filberts, palette knives with fan brushes, in a way that is not catastrophic but tells you exactly how much you were seen. I photographed everything. Then I sat at the kitchen table and finished the invoice. Both days, Saturday, 9 hours at $60, 540. Sunday, 7 hours, 420. 2 brushes with hair dye damage, $18 each for replacement. Specialty paper, 14 sheets damaged. I counted, and counted again, at the supplier rate per sheet. Drafting table surface refinishing, quote from the furniture repair shop on Route 9, which I had called first thing Monday morning, $85. Total $1,109. I emailed it to my daughter with the subject line, balance due, studio use, this weekend. I attached the photographs. I attached the county community center rate sheet. I attached the photograph of the brushes in the bathroom sink. Then I closed the laptop and went to the studio. I wasn't ready to paint yet. Not in a room that still smelled like someone else's afternoon. But I stood at the window in the northern light, and I held the glass palette, which I'd brought back from the closet, and I thought clearly about what came next. Thursday, I installed a keypad deadbolt on the studio door. The tutorial was 20 minutes. The installation took 40. It was good work. My daughter called Tuesday. I let it go to voicemail. She called Wednesday evening and I listened to the message. Mom, this invoice thing, we need to talk about this. Drew thinks it's anyway. Call me. I didn't call. Thursday, she texted. The brushes weren't even that expensive. And we brought food. I replied, the invoice stands. Payment instructions are at the bottom of the email. She replied a few minutes later, this is unbelievable. I set the phone down and went back to testing a blue-green on cold-pressed paper, checking how the pigment sat in the tooth, trying not to lose the afternoon light. My son-in-law called once on a Friday 3 weeks later. He didn't leave a message. I imagine there was a version of the call in his head where I apologized, or softened, or explained I hadn't really meant any of it. I imagine he was surprised when it went to voicemail. Sue's paralegal colleague sent a follow-up letter on his letterhead, noting the documentation, the county ordinance, and the matter of the damaged items. It was professional and precise, and exactly the kind of letter people tend to take seriously. My daughter called the day it arrived. You lawyered up, she said, over brushes. Over what the brushes represent, I said. Silence. I'm trying to understand why you're doing this, she said finally. I'm trying to understand why you called to tell me to clear out my room, I said. Not ask, tell. Something landed in the quiet between us. We needed space, she said. I know you needed space, I said. You could have asked me. I might have said yes. That surprised her. I could hear it. The idea that I might have said yes freely if she had asked. It surprised me a little too, honestly. But it was true. I would have thought about it. I would have moved the glass palette and the specialty paper. I would have asked people to be careful. And maybe, if they had been, maybe it would have been fine. Maybe I would have made the cornbread after all. But she hadn't asked. She had told. And that one syllable, the difference between can we and we will, was the whole thing. 11 years of setting aside what I wanted, and the one room I built for myself, she couldn't even ask. I didn't think you'd mind, she said. I know, I said. That's the part I needed you to understand. Another silence, longer. The invoice is real, I said. But more than that, the next time anyone comes to this house, they come by invitation, and the studio requires a conversation first. She didn't answer right away. You've changed, she said at last. I've been home, I said. The invoice was paid in 2 installments over the following 2 weeks, not by my daughter, but by my son-in-law, in separate Venmo transfers with no message attached. I deposited the money into the account I keep for house repairs and maintenance. I didn't note the irony out loud, but I noticed it. My daughter didn't come by for 6 weeks. When she did, she came alone, on a Sunday afternoon, and she knocked before she came in. I made tea. We sat at the kitchen table and talked about her kids, about a trip she and my son-in-law were planning, about the roses in the backyard, which had come in orange when I'd expected red. She didn't ask to see the studio I didn't offer. Before she left, she paused in the hallway, looking at the keypad on the studio door. "Does it have a code?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She nodded. She didn't ask for it. I knew then that something between us had changed. Not broken, not exactly, just reset to something more honest, more true to what we actually were, instead of the performance we'd both been maintaining for years. I gave her the code 6 months later, not because she pushed, but because she stopped pushing, because she started calling just to ask how I was, because one Sunday she brought lunch and sat with me in the studio and looked at the series of small paintings I'd been working on, lake water in different seasons, different light, and said quietly, "These are really good, Mom." Not nice, good. I gave her the code that afternoon before she left. She typed it into her phone without making a moment of it. But the lock is still there. Some things you don't undo. Not because you're still angry, I'm not anymore, but because the boundary is not the same thing as the wound. A door with a lock is not a closed door. It's just a door that opens when you choose on your terms, at your invitation. I spent 63 years opening my doors because I'd been taught that keeping them closed was selfish. I understand now that was never true. It was only convenient for everyone else. The studio smells like linseed oil and walnut stain now. The glass palette has 3 colors of dried paint on it. Actual use, the only way a palette should ever look. The drafting table was refinished, and the man who did it told me whoever had sanded it originally had done solid work. I told him I'd done it myself, and he looked at me like he was recalibrating something. The brushes are sorted in their jars again. Rounds, flats, filberts, each one in its place, which is the only way to find what you need when the light is right, and you don't want to lose a single minute of it. Some mornings I come in before coffee, just to stand at the window, just to be here, in the northern light I spent years as imagining. My hands remember things my years of absence almost erased: how to hold the brush loosely, how to trust the color before it dries, how to stop adding and let the painting become what it is. I think about the 4 years in the guest room, about the coffee I made before anyone asked, about the way I learned to take up less space, make less noise, want less, expect less, until I barely recognized the shape of myself in a room. I don't make myself small anymore. The roses came back this spring, deeper orange than last year. The paintings are stacking up against the studio wall. Good ones, ones I'm not embarrassed by. And when the phone rings now, I look at the name before I answer. Every single time.